Mom, Dad, there's no way that I can express to you what I'm feeling right now. My heart is full to bursting, except to say, I'm the king of the world!
Hello, welcome back to Cameron, King of the World. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the 2003 theatrical documentary, Ghosts of the Abyss, which was originally, I suppose, released as Ghosts of the Abyss 3D. It was a 3D movie, very much intended for the big screen, and I, of course, watched it in 2D on my TV. Anyway, following on from the 2002 TV documentary Expedition Bismarck, which Cameron co-directed, 2003 came with this documentary about another shipwreck, but one a little bit more familiar to the worldwide audience, that of course being the shipwreck of Titanic. Now, I'm not sure about the timeline of when that TV movie, Expedition Bismarck, came about in terms of Cameron making that, because the Ghost of the Abyss film was actually shot in 2001. So it took a couple of years before it was edited and put together and released. And I'm assuming maybe that was to do with the 3D. Well, maybe not actually. So I suppose the 3D would be done because they were using 3D cameras when they filmed it at the time. But there's a fair amount of digital manipulation going on and CGI in the film, so maybe that was the delay in kind of getting it finished, I suppose, because a lot of it had to be very carefully matched to the real footage, and I'll explain what I mean by that in just a second if you haven't seen the film already. So this is, for all intents and purposes, a James Cameron film. He directed this documentary, and he's done quite a few kind of deep sea diving documentaries, like Bismarck, which was a co-directing, I suppose, job for him, and in other instances he kind of produces them. But this is the only one that is really fully credited to him and him alone as being a documentary that he's directed. And of course it had a theatrical release, which is a little bit different than a TV movie. So Ghost of the Abyss, I'd never seen it before, and I watched it very shortly after watching Titanic, so it was kind of the perfect lead into that. And I kind of wonder if well, I was wondering, I should say, that I was wondering if the Expedition Bismarck documentary then led to him going, ooh, I want to do more of this, but let's do it at the Titanic. But given that it was released around 2002, I'm not entirely sure. Maybe he started making the Bismarck documentary in 2000, and then in 2001 decided to do a Titanic version. I don't know. Not that they're like, two identical films and follow the same kind of thing, but they're both documentaries about a shipwreck. But this one just happens to be the most famous shipwreck in recent history, being the Titanic. And it's interesting how, going through the not the motions as if it was nothing at all, but going through the experience of making the film Titanic in 1997, and just the weight that was probably on his shoulders with the budget kind of ballooning out of control, and then the film being released and this massive kind of wave of critical praise and commercial success and awards come award season the following year, you kind of think Cameron would probably be pretty sick of the Titanic, and maybe that's why it took him a few years to get around to doing something like this. But clearly he was still not done with Titanic, and actually there'll be another Titanic documentary covered later on in this series. It seems that Cameron he can't let go of the ship, it makes you think of the movie I'll Never Let Go. Cameron's never going to let go of the Titanic. In fact, we just watched, me and Connie, a documentary on Disney Plus called Titanic 20 Years Later. I won't be doing a video on that because he didn't make that. He just stars in it and does a few experiments. It was made in 2017, and they go through taking a model of the Titanic to try and be as accurate as possible, and they try to sink it to see if it would sink in the same way that they think the Titanic sunk. And also they do an experiment with a full-scale lifeboat. So Cameron actually gets onto one of them and tries to cut the rope out. So so that was in 2017. So yeah, and that was 5 years after he made a documentary called The Final Word on Titanic with James Cameron, which is the documentary I will be talking about at a later date in this series. But now we're talking about Ghosts of the Abyss, and this actually stars Bill Paxton, which is an interesting contrast with the film Titanic, in which he plays this Well, yeah, I guess you would call him. Well, he's not really a deep sea diver in terms of having an interest in the historical value of shipwrecks, but he's more of a pirate, a modern pirate. Bill Paxton's character in Titanic, he's looking for treasure. He's kind of rifling through the corpse of the Titanic looking for a diamond. But in this film, you just see the man Bill Paxton, who has never actually done this before. So the opening of the film Titanic, he's kind of like in the submersible. He's got kind of his camera there. He's holding it up. He's being dramatic and like saying, I'll never. Gets me every time, the ghost of this ship coming up out of the darkness, And then in this documentary, we see Bill Paxton get into a submersible for the first time in his life, and at least a deep sea one, and he goes down and he is shitting his pants, and it is really funny. I mean, obviously we know nothing bad happened, so we can kind of enjoy him squirming, but he's just constantly just like looking around like, is that meant to... Is it meant to sound like that? And it's a Russian crew that do these dives, and so he's like asking the Russian guy, like, is that okay? Like, if something goes wrong, like you apparently you can drop something, right? You can just let go of the battery, and the Russian guy's like, well, yes, but the battery is very expensive, and he's like, well, how much is it? He's like, $250,000, and Paxton's like, would you take a check? He's like super nervous and like just looking around and like, oh, and that was just really, really fun to see. But also interesting because as the movie goes on and as the expedition, can you call it an expedition? I don't really know if you can, but the mission, I don't know, the process of them being out there on the Russian ship and doing multiple dives, as that journey for Bill Paxton continues, he clearly becomes a lot more comfortable in the submersible, and so that's kind of fun to see him kind of grow from that perspective. Obviously, Cameron at that point was becoming more of a veteran of doing deep sea diving, and would later on be even more of a veteran of deep sea diving. And I'm not sure if it was before this or during this or after this, he became kind of a resident National Geographic explorer. So Cameron he's all in on this stuff, and his presence isn't really you don't feel it over the film. Bill Paxton is the guy guiding us through this journey. Now, another Titanic cast member who's also part of this documentary is Louis Abernathy, who plays Lewis in the film Titanic, and he's the big guy with the beard who kind of shows Rose the very dramatic CGI rendering of the descent of the Titanic to the seabed. And he's actually just a friend of James Cameron's. He's not really an actor, I don't think. That's another thing. Talking about Cameron being a bit of a revisionist at times. He said that Lewis was just his friend who he said, you have to play this part, it can only be you. Never done any acting before, but I think I've seen on IMDb he did some acting before, so I don't know. But he seems to have worked in the movie industry very sporadically and done some writing. But I actually thought at first that he was someone that Cameron had met doing the deep sea dives for the initial filming of the footage of the shipwreck of Titanic in 1995 for the movie, and then he added him to the main cast. That wasn't the case, so I'm assuming he is here too to do it for the first time, but they don't really focus on him. He's just kind of there and talks throughout the documentary, but he's not really like a focal point of guiding us through the shipwreck, which Bill Paxton very much is. And it's interesting how Cameron does take a bit of a backseat. I mean, he's there, and often you'll cut between Bill Paxton and one sub kind of being nervous about something, then you'll cut to Cameron and he's just there like fully focused and like controlling the ROVs, the little robots they have that go out from the submersible and they explore the wreck of the Titanic. And so to me, this is actually a perfect companion piece to the film Titanic, because this is like the real deal, and it does seek to kind of make you think about the reality of what happened, and just seeing like a deck, like one section of the Titanic, and then some, I want to say CGI, and it is CGI, but it's also they filmed actors walking around on the deck, and they've superimposed it onto the deck. So when I was saying CGI earlier, it kind of is, and they do a little bit of CGI tinkering to show you what the ship would look like, or what it did look like back when it was fully functional and not a wreck. And they kind of juxtapose that and layer that over the real footage of how it is now, or how it was then 20 years ago, which is interesting. Again, seeing this film, Ghost of the Abyss 2003, they made it in 2001, so it's almost 20 years old now. And from what they say, it'll be another 20 years from now the shipwreck will probably be completely vanished. I don't think that that's quite the case. I think there'll still be something there. I think it's a bit drastic to say it'll be gone, but it's certainly deteriorating at a rapid pace. And these kind of rust-eating, metal-eating barnacles and bacteria, they're eating the ship away, basically. So it's interesting that at least at that point in time, in 2001, they were kind of documenting the shipwreck as it was. And there's an incredible moment when they're taking the ROV through, I think it's the first class level, and they go inside this room and they see these stained glass windows that are still intact, or were at the time. And that kind of takes your breath away, and they show you what they would have looked like, what they did look like at the time. And then you see this kind of ghostly, and then like towards the end of the film they go back to that location and Cameron says, shine a light over that glass, and then you can really see, this is the first time light has shone through this stained glass window in almost 100 years. It was pretty much almost 100 years, I think. No, it wouldn't have been. 100 years was 2012. 90 years, hell of a long time either way, almost 100 years. So that was just wow. And it does drag a little bit, I'll be completely honest, at times. But there's just enough of new things around the corner. The first half an hour is very interesting as Bill Paxton's getting on the ship and he's doing this voiceover, which is a bit over dramatic at times, I will say, and he's talking about worrying about his safety and stuff, and feeling the severity of what could happen if something goes wrong with the dives. And something does go wrong, actually, and that makes the last 30 minutes of the film really a lot more interesting. It was just as it's starting to get a little bit tiresome. Again, the footage that you're getting is really, it doesn't look incredible. It's not like, oh my god, that's jaw-dropping, but it's just there's an importance to it. You just inherently feel this kind of weight just looking at this metal, this hunk of metal that vaguely has shapes here and there of what a ship would look like. And probably my favorite thing actually was seeing the back of the ship, the back half which fell off, which never gets any attention. It doesn't in the movie, and I can see why, because it's very cinematic to focus on the bow of the ship, because it's still kind of intact. You see the railings and the way it curves. It's flattened down quite a lot since as it collapsed onto the seabed, because it was coming down at a huge speed when it landed. But the back of the ship just kind of crumpled like a pancake. It's still fairly intact, but a lot of the finer details have just been crushed. But they go to the back half of the ship, and you see these huge engines, the engines of the ship, and they're like 4 stories tall. And it's just the side of the Titanic I'd never seen before in images or in documentary footage that is kind of spliced in between the making of the movie. They never really focus on that. So that was really, I liked that stuff a lot. And then seeing the back of the ship, which is still kind of intact, just that kind of the stern? And if you watch the movie, the part where Kate Winslet climbs over and threatens to throw herself off, and so they actually leave a plaque on the back end of the ship, which was a really nice touch. But as I was saying, the last half hour of the film really got interesting when they ran into some trouble and they lost one of the ROVs, where they have 2 of these things. I can only imagine they're incredibly expensive, and they just lost it. And Cameron is devastated by this, like he just can't believe it. And they come up back to the surface, and it's just really somber. But then Cameron's like, we got to go back and get it. Like, it's a risk because they'd have to send the ROV that they did come back and was still functioning, and they could risk losing both of them. So it's a real gamble. But they go in and they tried to salvage it and they don't quite get it. So they go back again, and so now you're just like, oh my god, they're really building this up. So I really liked the stress inherent of seeing this real life situation unfold, where they're trying to grab this thing with the other thing and these 2 robots, and to kind of just bring it out and salvage whatever they can. And there's just like a really almost cinematic moment where there's literally a light at the end of the tunnel. There's this passageway out of the ship, and the light is shining through, and they're trying to get it through, and then it gets snagged on some rope. Like, it feels like a scripted moment from a movie, but it's all real. And so that I really enjoyed that kind of last section. And then the film just takes on a really an even more somber tone, much more somber than losing an ROV, because I'm not sure if they edited it this way, but from what the film presents, while Cameron was down there trying to rescue the lost ROV, September 11th happened, the attacks on the World Trade Center. So Cameron comes up and it's this very celebratory thing, and then Bill Paxton's on there like, Jim, it's the biggest terrorist attack that our country's ever, and he's like, what are you talking about? Like, and then it just all kind of hits, and everyone is like, dumbstruck by it, as you would be. Like, it's something that most of the world saw unfold practically in real time. I remember when I was a kid, I wasn't in school at the time. I should have been in school, but I just moved from England back to Wales, and the school that I should have gone to, my secondary school, they wouldn't accept me for some reason. I still don't know why. So I had to apply for a different school. So in the interim between September and December of 2001, so I was 13. That was what year would that be then? Year 9, I think. Yeah, I think so. Year 8 or year 9, regardless. That year, for 4 months, I didn't have school. I had a home tutor who would come and see me, but it wasn't the equivalent of like full-time schooling. So I was at home, and I don't even know if it was a school day, but I just very vividly remember that my life was in that living room for quite a few months in terms of doing school and watching movies, and that was in my grandparents' place. In this big house on the top of a cliff overlooking the sea, and the TV came on, and it was the World Trade Center kind of announcement that something had happened. There was a terrorist attack, and I remember the first thing I saw was a close-up of the building, and it looked like train tracks to me. The way that the kind of lines on that gray steel, and I thought, oh, is a plane crashed on some train tracks, and it pulls out, and then the second plane hit. So I very vividly remember that day, as I'm sure most people do, but they didn't even get to see all that play out like that, which maybe is a blessing. I don't know. So it's just weird that it's just kind of this big thing that they've rescued something, and it's a big hurrah moment, and then you get brought right back down to earth with something, and it almost eerily kind of contrasts with the tragedy of Titanic. Obviously, two completely different things in terms of what caused those incidents, but a huge loss of life and a disaster, kind of a human disaster. So yeah, the film ends on kind of a rough note like that, but it's an interesting document of that time period, but mainly, just seeing the parts of the ship and then the superimposing of actors where people might have been on the Titanic. It doesn't feel as refined as the special effects you see in Titanic, but there is kind of an eerie quality to it that I quite enjoyed. So yeah, it almost feels a little bit cheap at times, I have to say. And it wasn't the way that it was originally intended to be shown either, which is in 3D. And I've read reviews of the 3D presentation just to see, what people might think of the 3D version, to see if I'm missing anything. And I've seen more than a few people comment on the 3D version that they saw in the cinema, and that it kind of it felt like it wasn't using the 3D enough, because a lot of the shots of the Titanic are close up. There's no like big, kind of wide establishing shot or anything. And I can't really remember if there was. I suppose there wasn't, because people said there wasn't. I watched this a few weeks ago, but I don't feel like it needed that. I think that getting in close to the details is what makes it so. Another great part was when you see where the captain's wheel was, which, if you see in the film, it's like this big room with glass, and you look out in front of the ship and there's the wheel, and it's gone. The room is gone. It's just flat, and there's like a little nub where the wheel would be. And it's just kind of like, wow, that thing just got ripped off when on the way down, or maybe eaten away by bacteria, who knows. They go down into the hold, I guess, where the cars are. They find a couple of cars down there, and they're finding things that they had never found before. And so and there was another what's the term? It was like kind of a bathroom area in one of the rooms, and it's kind of like a little not balcony, a little cabinet, but not really a cabinet, a little shelf, I suppose, a shelf, with like a medicine bottle still there. Also on the seabed of the ocean, they just find this like perfectly preserved glass bottle as well, big jug. It's just crazy, It's and another thing that I found really unsettling was when Lewis Abernathy, who plays the guy in Titanic, he was talking about, he once saw during one of the dives on this trip, this mission, just a shoe that was still tied. Just think about that. Like, that is, and he's saying that's the gravestone, that's the marker for that person, whoever that was, and it's rough, And they actually get into a little bit of a debate, because they're all sat around a table just discussing the whole thing, and he's saying that you know, the people in the lifeboats of the Titanic shouldn't have gone back, because, you know, they would have just been swarmed by everyone in the water and everyone would have died. And a woman really disagrees with them on that, and so, you know, they show that little bit of tension in there. And but yeah, I would like to see a little bit more Cameron, I suppose, maybe a bit more of a presence from him, you know, because I feel like with him making the documentary, but it feels like perhaps he's just more focused on like the footage he's getting and not so much presenting it to the camera. So I think that's probably why he brought Bill Paxton down, because Paxton wasn't going to be like, you know, running the thing, but it does seem like they're all talking things over and kind of planning out exactly where they're going on each dive and stuff, so you get to see a lot of that stuff. And overall, I think it's a really damn good documentary. I definitely want to try and find maybe a 3D Blu-ray of it. I can't watch it anymore because 3D TVs don't get made anymore, but I think I could watch it on the PSVR headset. That might be an interesting experiment down the line. And I do think there is a 3D Blu-ray of it that exists. But yeah, as a companion piece of Titanic, I think it's really good. Mainly, again, just seeing like the back half of the ship, just stuff that doesn't get as much attention, even though it still is every time really haunting to see that front of the ship, because it's just it feels iconic, I suppose. And for me, from my perspective, the film is a big part of that iconography of the ship, the way that it presents it and, you know, projects it as this grand achievement of kind of you know, man-made construction, and then shows its downfall, but also kind of, you know, celebrates it in some ways, mourns it in other ways. And I think the documentary does the same, but on a much more real level. And for that, I think it's a really fascinating piece, and it's only an hour and a half, so I think it doesn't outstay its welcome. Again, it dragged a tiny bit, but not too much, and I just really enjoyed it. But it definitely isn't the last time that Cameron would make a documentary, or at least be involved in a documentary about the world of the ocean and what lies beneath. So we'll be talking about more of that stuff next time. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you then.